Previously, on Palace of Mirrors, Captain Bluebeard recounted to Darien the story of his youth, how he fell in love with a woman named Arlinda, the mysterious door in their basement, and finally, how she betrayed him, conquered his planet, and executed his family. And now, Palace of Mirrors, Season 1, Episode 19, The Stone-Strewn Path. One day, Darien, I walked the hull of a ship. Explosions rocking the hull. Beams and panels lay in my path. Wires sparked and writhed like eels. My breath froze into ice crystals, and the smell of burnt flesh stung my nose. Bodies, the dead and the dying, slumped before me. I stepped over them with nary a thought. Sometimes I try to remember when a body stopped being something sacred, evidence of the passing of a life from this reflection. Once the dead were something more to me than stones strewn along my path. That's just one thing Arlinda stole from me. Aye, not the last, though. Not the last by far. Passing a porthole, I witnessed a sky of stars littered with wreckage. Even as I strode over all those bodies, a flash of energy lit up the black of space and sliced a ship in two. People spilled into vacuum to freeze and suffocate in the darkness. I wish I could tell you I marked their passing, but I had been consumed long ago, and I had no room left in my heart for anything beyond my obsession. Arlinda stood on the bridge at the end of that broken hall, beyond the bodies and the smoke. I had thought of nothing beyond her since the day she left me for dead in that chamber below our home. No, that's wrong. I had thought of nothing beyond her since the moment I spied her from the deck of my sailing ship. There was her and no one else. Even now, long after it has all become nothing more than the ramblings of an old man, not a night passes where I don't dream of her. Not a day goes by when I don't feel her at my back, just out of view, but always present. How did I come to stand there in that hall in the midst of a graveyard of my own making? How do I come to sit beside you now? I would besiege the Palace of Mirrors for answers. I did once, did you know that? I went there, and I begged, but it gave me only silence. So, if I cannot tell you the truth, I will tell you instead what I remember, as flawed a thing as that must be. I took quickly to the life of a pirate after Captain Hooknose found me drunk on the docks. For years I had been tormented by thoughts of what Arlinda had done to me and my family. But as a pirate, no one expected me to think. I had simply to follow any order I was given, and if sometimes my orders required of me things I never thought I would do, well, it was worth the price, was worth it to have relief from all those thoughts. We plundered, we took slaves, we slaughtered, and above all we struck terror in all who had the misfortune to cross our path. Those were good days to be a pirate. No one had the organization and military might to stand against us. No one save Arlinda. Her world's armada hunted us relentlessly across the vast nothingness. We struck and melted into space as though it were the fabric of our being. We spent countless empty days in the deep space between the stars. Weeks sometimes passed before we again felt the light of a sun. During those long weeks I lay on the observation deck and stared up at the unmoored stars. In some ways, I felt much the same as the boy who had once lain on his balcony staring at the night sky. But also, how different I had become. Looking at those stars, I felt it deep down. None of them lay where the stars of my childhood had lain. I wondered where in all that vast space Arlinda stood. I imagined her asleep in bed, her hair spread out like the morning sun. Still, I loved her. And still I knew I must kill her. One day the captain announced the time had come to seek other worlds to pillage. Arlinda's military had proven too persistent. There were richer planets to be found, planets with neither fleets nor orbital defenses. I ran my sword through him where he stood. He collapsed, his blood running down my blade, and his wide eyes staring up at me. I remember how warm his blood felt on my hand. The sensation took me back to a long-forgotten memory. Shortly after I married Arlinda, long before the morning when I discovered the door, I woke to an empty bed. I realized in that moment the true cost of love, that to love is to accept loss. Eventually she would die, or I would, and we would be parted. In that moment, our bed spread vast as the ocean. I discovered her out the window, red nightgown flying on the wind. Scrambling down the frigid stone steps and across the yard, I went to where she stood on the cliff overlooking the ocean. I wrapped her in my arms. "The morning flies on the wind," she laughed and hugged me close. "Or does the wind fly on the morning?" The waves crashed against the rocks below. Eventually the stone would erode to sand. It might take 1,000,000 years, but in the end the stone would give way to the sea. The waves crashed, and I held Arlinda close. She felt warm, even in her thin nightgown, against the sea breeze. Warm, like the blood of my former captain on my hand. It dripped from my fingers, the sound punctuating the silence that followed my actions. His first officer broke the moment open with a roar and charged. In a single motion, I wrenched my sword from my captain's chest and parted his first officer from his gun and the hand that held it. As they lay dying at my feet, I held my sword, blood gleaming along the edge, to the rest of the crew. They stared at the tableau in shock. At last, the helmsman, his voice cracking, said, "What are your orders, Captain?" I closed my eyes. My respite from thinking had come to an end. I mourned silently, but only for an instant. One cannot survive indefinitely in deep space. Eventually we must emerge from the darkness. Just as the waves will eventually wear away the strongest stone, time will eventually wear us down. We have only to wait, and it will happen. Set course for the planet of the setting sun. I stepped over the captain's still bleeding corpse. The time had come to return home. Darien scraped his eyes open. Something beyond pain, a sheer exhaustion he had never felt, filled every fiber of his body. It almost reminded him of the ache that had followed his leap from the barn, but that had been something sharp and insistent. His muscles, his bones, his lungs, and even his heart felt weary, as though waiting for the next blow. Bluebeard appeared as a blur of color, an impression of a person, but as Darien focused, the old man's face sharpened into something real. "You're awake," he leaned forward. "The computer said not to expect you to regain consciousness for several hours longer at least. Still, what can I expect? I've not had a proper doctor on board for several years." The medical bay had just enough space for a single cot and a cabinet whose door had long since been lost. Knowing Gent, Darien expected that it had been recycled long ago, the matter put to a more pressing use. Bandages, gauze, and medicine bottles were sorted neatly within. The best stuff never made it into the cabinet, of course. Bluebeard sold it off on the black market of some distant world. Darien struggled to imagine his own world, let alone some planet orbiting a faraway star. His world had shrunk to the size of that small room. It had become the creaking of the ship, the rumble of Bluebeard's voice, and the antiseptic scent of the medbay. Bluebeard shifted uneasily in his seat and stood to leave. "I'd best let you rest. There will be much for you to do when you've recovered. I'm down 2 crew members after all, and there's much you'll need to learn to travel the stars on the Kraken." Darien had forgotten the captain's offer. It meant seeing the stars with his own eyes. It meant traveling the worlds of Kathy's stories. It meant leaving Marialla to a fate unknown, and it meant night would forever hang at Bluebeard's side. His mind stumbled on the last thought. Wasn't it the sword that had gotten him captured by pirates in the first place? Bluebeard hesitated in the doorway, the sword at his side. In the cramped room, the weapon looked out of place, as though it had been torn from a dream of some other world. "Aren't you going to finish?" Darien's voice rasped. Bluebeard froze, prey before predator. I didn't think you'd heard me." Darien closed his eyes. "Listening to a story reminds me of home." Bluebeard crumpled onto the stool, exhaled once, and began to speak. For months, we raided the planet where I had grown up staring into the stars, where I had learned to find my feet on the deck of a ship that never stopped rolling with the waves, where I had fallen in love and had my heart broken. For months, we raided a place I had once called home. 1,000 times and more, we swooped out of the sky and took all we could. 1,000 times and more, I watched pillars of smoke rise from flames that had once been homes. Still, it was not enough. Never enough. It was not enough to simply take all they owned. I had to take all they were, as they had taken all I was when they sided with Arlinda. Her fleets hunted us without mercy. Her ships and mine battled over the city of my childhood. Traffic bustled on the streets and in the air between glittering buildings so that the city looked like something shining and alive. I remembered the truth. The city with its towers and traffic was nothing more than a gravestone. I had walked through the rubble. I had counted the dead. I had goals beyond hurting the people who had sided with my enemy. I wanted to embarrass Arlinda, who ran the puppet government her world had set up to rule my planet. I wanted to unsettle her. I wanted to make it impossible for her to ignore me. With every brazen attack, with every citizen kidnapped and taken into slavery, with every priceless artifact I stole, I shouted to the sky a message. You have no power over me, no power to protect those you've sworn to keep safe. Our luck ran out on a raid like any other. My men died as her ships tore into us, but I could not bring myself to run. I drew the battle out until I had no choice. Her fleet gave chase as we fled. In every way, the little ship I had commandeered was outmatched. Arlinda's world had provided faster, better-armed ships that could take anything I threw at them. It took all the tricks I had learned as a pirate to evade her and vanish into the vacuum. Hidden deep in the dark, far from any star, my ship in tatters and most of my crew dead, I realized how futile my efforts had been. I had gotten Arlinda's attention, but it had cost me almost everything I had left. At the end of everything, she still lived. Lashing out at my world had done nothing to change that one central, simple, infuriating fact. Desperate, I meditated in my engine room and waited for answers that would never come. I even set a course for Leviathan and the Palace of Mirrors, but found only a door that would not open. So I returned to my ship and disappeared into history. If the Palace of Mirrors would not give me an answer in the present, maybe it had already provided one in the past. I learned much in those months, things that my tutors had never deigned to teach me. I learned that the Empire had presided over many worlds that had not wanted to be ruled by a distant empress sitting on a throne of glass. I learned that not all the knights of the guard had been honorable and true. I learned that the empress on the throne had not always been wise and beautiful. And I learned about the Mahaji, who did not worship the Palace of Mirrors. They were a group that worshipped the silence of ocean depths and the darkness between the stars. They believed that the universe had been fashioned in a great circle, one that had started as nothingness and that would end the same. They believed in the strength that held the darkness back from the light. In short, they were a thing the Empress on her throne of glittering glass, within her palace of shining mirrors, could not abide, Likewise, the Mahaji saw the Palace of Mirrors as a thing that must be broken to make way for the greater circle. They fought a war that brought enemy ships to the skies of Leviathan, but in the end, they could not overcome the 13. I had been raised to believe in the Palace of Mirrors, and I still do. But maybe by this point you understand that there was no belief I had ever held that I would not toss aside if it meant exacting my vengeance. So I sought the order of the Mahaji. They had grown small in number following their defeat that long ago day, but you cannot so easily end an order that believes in strength above all things. They retreated, but they never vanished. In the end, the Mahaji had outlived the Palace of Mirrors. Someday, I will take you to their temple. It is a lone dwarf planet, a nomad that calls no star home. Cloaked in shadow, it cannot be seen with the naked eye, and any ship that attempts to shine a light in that place does not long survive. Legend says that murals have been carved into the skin of the stone. Some say those carvings hold magic, like the tattoos worn by those who follow the way. They say that the murals show the end of all things, that if you could see them, you would see the passing of all the circles of time to the very final one, the very strongest circle, the one that at last brings the universe back to nothingness. I do not follow the way, but having been to that place, I wonder if those stories might actually be true. To be there is to breathe the night itself. I sought guidance, and I found it written in blood. You know something of that story already, I believe. The challenge I laid out before the warriors and the bloodshed that followed. I learned when it had all ended and only the dead remained to worship the darkness, that there are few emotions more powerful than pride. The Mahaji had been a proud people. They had been unwilling to bend when I challenged them, and so they had met their end. In that realization, the seed of a plan bloomed in my mind. It took years to grow into something real. I gathered a fleet of ships, crewed by the desperate and the broken, and returned one last time to my world. I'll never forget how beautiful it looked that day, like blown glass filled with light. It had only looked so beautiful to me on one other day, the day of my wedding. One last time my ship dove down to raid. Arlinda's fleets responded. We fled, but not so quickly that they couldn't follow, and follow they did. They chased us until my world had become just another star. They should have known. They should have seen that they had been drawn too far, that my ship fled too slowly. But pride, the same pride that had ended the Mahaji, drew them into my trap. My fleet, hidden behind an ice giant, fell upon our pursuers and turned them into so much ash and scrap and corpses. I took no prisoners and spared no ships. After the massacre, I had my crew package up the bodies and wreckage. One by one, a week at a time, we launched them to Arlinda. The final box held only a single note written in my own hand, the same hand that had once written her love letters. It said simply, "Everything must fall." From this moment I turned my fleet from my old world. It had been my home once, but I never returned, though I sometimes smell the ocean wind on the edge of sleep. We began our assault on Arlinda's solar system. This proved no easy task. Her world had grown wealthy through trade and conquest, and they had an armada that made the fleet I had dealt with so far look like a minor inconvenience. A network of unmanned defense probes that patrolled the outer borders of the solar system further complicated things. I had no choice but to test the grid by sending ship after ship to its doom. The grid covered all the major routes into the system, and many of the least obvious. They layered the drones so that holes in the outermost perimeter led to well-defended points deeper in the system. It took time and many lives, but eventually I believed I had found a way through. I remember the way my heart pounded the day I looked at the computer simulation and saw the path it had mapped to Arlinda's homeworld. I should have been focused on tactics, but I found myself embroiled in conversations yet to be. Incessantly, I muttered the things I would tell her before I ended her life. My crew looked at me askance, but they had grown to fear me. It had not been easy to turn pirates into an instrument of vengeance, and Captain Hooknose had not been the last to die. I gathered my fleet together so that I could personally speak with the captain of each ship. I would not leave any part of our final assault to the whims of some other captain. I stepped onto the bridge of the ship belonging to my second in command, ready to convince him of my plan. But before I could speak, a drone folded into space in our midst. My flagship, the vessel I had taken by force from Captain Hooknose, turned to fire before my eyes. I rushed to the view screen, mouth agape, and stared in dumbstruck wonder at the burning wreck. Bodies, lit by flames, tumbled through the vacuum. I didn't have time to contemplate their loss. The deck below rocked with the shockwave of another ship going up, and then another, and another, and another. My fleet, put together with such care and at such cost, burned around me. I tore myself from the view and began screaming orders to the remaining panicked ships. We took down the drone, but not before it reduced my great attack fleet to 2 vessels and little more than scrap. In the mechanical flesh of the probe, I found a single piece of paper. I have it here, in my pocket. It never strays far from my heart. See the script. See it well. It's her hand. Everything must fall, but I'll not fall first. I could have given up there. I wish I had. I wish it so. But how do you give up your life's purpose? How do you let go of all you've made yourself? I rebuilt my fleet, though it required me to scour every port on every world of note for 100 light years. I traveled to worlds that had not touched the stars since the fall, and I found those starved for the touch of space on their skin. Like the touch of space, I destroyed them all in the end. I dreamed of Arlinda every night. I woke on the floor, my blankets strewn like blood around me, my mouth dry, my heart a drum in my chest, and my voice raw from screaming her name in my sleep. She had set fire to my world so many years ago, but the flames still burned hot. I thought I had survived her assault, but when I slept I learned the truth. Her fire had burned me, and I just hadn't had the good sense to die. I remember well the final day of Arlinda's life. I remember it as though it were the final day of my own life. I remember it as only the dead can remember the living. I stood on the bridge of my ship. Stars, Darien, stars. You must see them. I knew it the day I found you in that storehouse, holding that ancient sword. You looked like something from the legends of old. I wander from my story. I wander like an old man lost at sea. Her world, the sky tinted purple, floated in a sea of stars. Clouds swirled over the surface, and green mountains capped in snow climbed the sky. Blue oceans swept between the continents, and almost I longed to stand on a ship, the wooden deck creaking, the railings smoothed with the sea beneath my hands. Almost. The man who longed for the ocean had died long ago. I had killed him and carved it all away and made him into something that could do what he never could. I took a deep breath and ordered my ships to burn it to ash and cinder. I ordered them to open fire and not stop until even the ruins had turned to dust. Their fleet met mine, and the battle begun. Like a fire, it grew. Have you ever watched a fire burn? Just watched it? The flames prowl like raging animals and dance like broken dreams. They're like your wind in the trees, like your sister's fiddle, always the same and always different. I close my eye and I see it all, more vivid and sharp than any moment in the present. Blasts of energy careen across the stark black of space. Rockets explode in a mist of orange and red. Ships shimmer in the shifting sun. Most I remember the silence. When a ship exploded in a rain of fire and faded to smoke and darkness, I would hear no sound save the murmuring voices on my bridge. It has never seemed right to me that so many can die in such silence. Arlinda led the fleet herself. It wasn't wise, but she did it all the same. Did she fear the political fallout if she remained behind while her people fought a war she had helped start? Did she just not want to leave the battle to others? Maybe. Or maybe our fates had become intertwined, and she had no choice but face me in the end. Her flagship, a simple vessel of curves, had been decorated with a mural of a forest on the slopes of a jagged mountain. It burst through the wreckage of another ship, and we traded blasts back and forth. Our defense screens lensed the energy aside. Every time I thought we had her, she managed to dodge out of the way. Every time I felt the breath of death on the back of my neck, we came out the other side in one piece. We rolled and dove, and light followed. We danced as though we had spent our entire lives practicing the steps. And after all, we had. We fell and fell and fell until inevitably, thunder, louder than the storm at sea. Wind tore me from my feet and swept me into a console. I carry that limp still, as I carry so many things. I'm tired of it all. You may understand someday, Darien, what it is to carry such weight. If you live long enough, you'll understand. Damn it all. The hull had shattered and split my bridge open. My crew, men and women I had grown to love, tumbled out into space. Their frozen eyes watched me claw my way to the airlock. It grew easy as all the air emptied from the bridge. I had only to hold my breath and hope my frozen heart could withstand the cold of space. Did I think of letting go? After all, it might have been peaceful to drift, and I had known so little peace in my life. Even for a moment did I consider. No, I had no room for death in my soul. Arlinda's ship lay alongside my own, just as broken, listless in time, wreckage upon the waves. Docking tubes cut from one ship to the other, and the battle shifted from the stars to the corridors. Now, I'm where I began. Darien, let me end it here at the beginning. I'd rather believe I never found her. I'd rather believe that even now I stalk the decks of her dead ship, that even now I had the power to change events. It is not so. I came at last to a door. After everything, you probably don't expect me to tell you I hesitated. You might think I strode through that door with only my sword to guide me, but a boy named Cal stood before a door once, and when he stepped through, it cut him deep. For a moment I could think only of him. For the first time in years I did not think of murder. I thought only of the boy I had been and the woman he had loved. A woman I loved still. I thought of her eyes the day I had seen her on the docks, how sharp they had been, and how beautiful. The battle raged, an asteroid field of broken metal and broken men. My creation. What had I done? What had I become? In a moment of clarity, I knew this would be my last chance to turn aside. I pushed a button, and the door opened. Still, I could have walked away, or could I have? Do I just say it, because so often I have hated myself for not? Can an object dropped choose to stop, to take in the view from above, to simply not fall? I stepped into the room and found Arlinda, her golden hair wild around her face. Blood drew a line from a swollen lip. Her blue eyes, deep as ocean waves, met mine. "It's been a long time, husband." "Linda." I had always imagined a wild charge at this point, but instead I found myself calmly walking to stand at her side. We faced a window, but not the battle. This side of the ship looked out only at stars. We stood together, our hands on a railing almost touching. I spoke the words that I had rehearsed for so long. Tell me one thing. Did you ever love me?" She closed her eyes and took a breath, the softness of the sound setting a cascade of memories through my mind. "I loved a young man standing on the deck of his ship, his face raw from the sea, and his eyes wide with the wind. I loved him truly." My breath hitched in my chest, as though it no longer knew where it belonged. She looked to me and spoke. "And you, tell me one thing. Must you do this?" The ship, drifting out of control, had continued to roll as we spoke, and now the battle came into view. Her world hung delicate beyond the chaos. "I must." Before the words had faded from the room, she spun and drove a dagger into my face. I stepped back, but, as you know, it was not enough to save my eye. I clutched my face. My blood ran, a torrent of red tears, from what remained of the eye, the last tears it would ever cry. One hand held that eye, and the other my sword. We fought in silence. She moved with a grace I had never seen in a swordsman. I had only one eye, one hand, and a bad limp. In moments, she had me backed up against the bulkhead. She did not hesitate, did not speak any final words, did not so much as blink. She drove for my heart, and I could do nothing. I had been well and truly beaten. All I had done had been for naught. An explosion rocked the ship, and her sword swung wide and clanged against the wall. I let go of my eye, grabbed her wrist, and twisted it until it snapped. Her sword fell from her limp hand and sang against the floor. In the fading roar of the explosion, I drove my sword into her body. I drove it in until I had closed all the distance between us. Her blood covered us and spread out across the floor. She tried to whisper in my ear, but I couldn't hear the words through the blood in her mouth. Maybe she whispered nothing at all. Maybe it was just her final breath. Years and lives had passed since I had set out to kill Arlinda, and now I held her corpse, but I felt no peace. I only wanted to hear those words, to know what they had been. I only wanted to take her hand in my own and forgive her for all that had passed between us. "Linda, wake up, Linda." I lay in her blood, holding her, and wept. The ship thrummed just out of hearing, and yet all was felt. Bluebeard sat in silence, his hands clasped tightly together. He stared past the hull of the ship, deep into the past. "You bring things out of me, boy, things I had thought gone and dead and so very dead." Darien sat up straight, a sharp pain in his leg as his weight shifted. "Did I ever tell you how I got my name? My mother gave it to me. She gave me life, and she gave me a name, and then she died. Most people in my world have simple names, stout and strong, names to survive winter after winter and never get worn down. That's the kind of name my father wanted for me. He dreamed I would have a simple life. He dreamed of the moon beneath my feet. But as my mother died, she took his hands." Darien reached out and grasped Bluebeard's hand. She had almost no strength left, and her entire body shook with the effort. With all the breath left in her chest, she told him, "Our boy's name is Darien. Promise me." He did, and then she died. Darien closed his eyes and tried to see the scene as Kathy had described it, but the details eluded him. His mother's face kept turning into Kathy's on the day she had died, her hand in his. 19 years she's been gone, my entire life, but I still carry this name and all the dreams that come with it. I heard an old saying in one of my aunt's stories, "May the dead rest in peace." They used to put it on gravestones, but it seems to me the dead always rest in peace. It's us, who've been left behind, who are haunted. They sat together, hands still clasped. The clouds passed away around the ship, silent and unseen from the cloistered medbay. They sat together in silence, each thinking of the other. The pirate and the farmer, the old man and the boy, the blinded and the dreamer. They sat together. After some time, Bluebeard shook his head, as though waking from a deep dream. With the care of a parent holding a newborn, he set Darien's hand aside. He slid, silent as a Ragnar, to the door. "Captain." Bluebeard froze at the word and waited for Darien to continue. "I'm ready to tell you where I found Knight." The captain spun, his eyes wide. "This sword?" Bluebeard touched Knight's hilt with a shiver. "That was the deal we shook on, the day you found me, the place I found the sword for my freedom." Bluebeard blinked but did not speak. "You remember that deal?" I remember a fanciful story." "You remember your promise." Bluebeard stepped forward and drew Knight halfway. "I'll not be ordered about as though I were some lowly deckhand on my own ship. You're mine, understand? You trespassed in my storeroom. You are mine to deal with as I will, boy." "Run me through, then," Darien whispered. "Run me through, or put me below with the other prisoners, or throw me out of your ship. But I'll not become you." Bluebeard staggered back, and his shoulders drooped. Knight slid from his fingers back into the sheath. The captain leaned on the door frame, his back to Darien. He stared at the door. Darien stood, a hiss of pain escaping his lips, and limped to Bluebeard. He rested a hand on the man's shoulder. "Why did you let me live that day?" I told you already. How many times must I say it?" Darien shook his head. "We both know there's something more." "I recognized you," Bluebeard breathed. "I recognized something I'd once been, a long time ago. I recognized a boy who lay on his balcony under the stars. I saw it in your eyes the moment we met, and you held forth this sword. I recognized that space is so very big, and so very cold, and so very empty, and I am so very alone." Darien closed his eyes. He felt the strength in Bluebeard's shoulder. He felt the strength of an old tree grown deep in the soil and reaching far into the sky. "Will you leave me?" Bluebeard hissed so that Darien felt it more than he heard it. He felt strength, yes, but he also felt weariness, as an old tree would be weary of the winds of winter beyond counting, of the weight of snow that had bent its boughs nearly to the point of breaking, of the never-ending clouds, weary as a tree that had never truly seen the sun. He felt it in the captain as he could have felt the scars of that tree, scars deeply woven. "I must," Darien's voice broke. He felt, and did not hear when Bluebeard acquiesced. Bluebeard's shoulders slumped with the wind of Darien's voice. The old man pulled away and opened the door. Darien wondered how he could open any door. What had a door ever held for him? Yet the captain's back straightened as he stepped over the threshold. His shoulders squared. Aye, I'll keep my promise, but hear me, Darien. You must keep your end of the bargain. I'll not accept a red X on a map. You must show me the place. Then and only then will I free you. If you can't, well, I won't have it said a boy tricked Captain Bluebeard and lived to tell the tale. Next episode, Darien must come up with a plan to get himself off the Kraken without ending up on the wrong side of Bluebeard's sword. Thank you for listening to Palace of Mirrors. If you liked the show, please give it a 5-star rating on your platform of choice and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy it. I truly appreciate your support. This podcast was produced, written, and narrated by Matthew Lindquist, with music by Nature's Eye on Pixabay.